Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to my channel. I'm just jumping on here to uh, explore, do a little personal research, do my own research. Um, yeah, and take you along for a little ride as I do it. I've already looked at this particular paper, and in this paper, I discovered something I knew nothing about before. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm not really here to talk to you about 50 million year old bat specimen, although I'm going to tell you a little bit about it as a prelude to talking about solenodons. But yeah, Solenodons. Yeah, if you're like me, you may have never heard of those before. If you've heard of them before, well, like awesome to you. You know an awful lot of mammalian families, I suspect. I thought I was at least familiar with possibly all of the mammalian families. I really feel like at least all the extant ones, living ones. Apparently not. Apparently not. I don't think I'd ever run into the Solenodons before. And so I just had to find something out about it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I found out, and I'm going to be learning a little as I'm talking. All right. We're going to explore some resources, and I'll take you on a trip of like how I go about, teaching myself things. So it all started yesterday, or and maybe the day before. A friend of mine alerted me to this particular publication. Thought I'd be interested um, for reasons that will become apparent in a few minutes. And it's about, it's a bat fossil. This article was just released in the last couple days, so this is fresh stuff, brand new. Revelation of a fossil. Actually, it turns out it's a multiple fossils that were found in limestone that formerly was a cave system in Germany. And embedded in that limestone are these very well preserved bats. And if you know anything about bat paleontology, is that it's not the best, right? There's not a whole lot of well preserved bats. Little fragments of bats, jaws, a couple little teeth at times. But in terms of whole body skeletons, especially skeletons that aren't crushed or been distorted to a great extent, are very, very rare. So here what you're looking at is you're looking at the front page of this article by Susan Hand et al. And she and her colleagues have described this bat fossil, which is actually embedded in limestone, and they've done CT scans, right, to look basically peer through the limestone and then be able to see this particular skull, kind of like using CT to see the insides of you and so forth. All right, and so that you can see this picture down here is actually the CT scan of the skull of this recreation of this bat, an extinct bat. And the paper's about echolocation, and they have this little phylogeny here, right? A simple relationship tree showing that you have all the different groups of extant bats. And remember, there's like the bat group, right? The bat family or order, taxonomic order, is the most speciose in terms of living taxa alive today. About 1,000 different species of bats in a whole bunch of different families, and there's a bunch of genera, and of course, about 1,000 species. And all of them are thought to be related by a common ancestor sometime in the last 30 million years, right, by conventional dating. And so this particular fossil is suggested to have existed in a group of bats that existed before the common ancestor to all modern bats. So you got like all the 1,000 bats that are today, and you go back in time, and they're all related by a common ancestor. But at that time, there was other bats that were alive. Most of those went extinct, except one lineage that ended up being the modern bats. And this particular lineage is thought to be a sister to that common ancestor to all modern bats. Not necessarily the answer, this particular sample, this particular specimen right here, this actual organism that existed in the past, isn't necessarily, in fact, is unlikely to be the actual ancestor to modern bats. But this particular bat might be the sister or cousin or a related taxon to a common ancestor that hypothetically is the ancestor to all the modern living bats. And so they're showing this the star shape right here represents like this is a shared ancestor to all the ones. And then suggested in this paper is going to be like we're showing evidence, right? We have physical evidence, observations from this skull that this particular animal likely had echolocation because it has a similar morphology to its ear bones than does modern bats. And therefore, this suggests that echolocation existed in some of the deepest ancestors of the modern bats. So echolocation may have only have to have evolved one time, and then it was shared to all the other bats after that. And what I want you to notice on this particular figure is there's a whole bunch of other taxa, other lineages of bats that are called the early Eocene bats. And so we do have fossils. Lots of them are little remnants, but they are clearly distinct from all modern day bats, and therefore represent other lineages of bats distinct from modern bats that have gone extinct in the past. And the bats represent an extremely old lineage that potentially goes all the way back into the late Cretaceous in terms of its origins. All right, so I only want to look at one other. I mean, I'm pretty much said everything I'm going to say about this particular paper and the whole bat story, because that's not what I'm here for. We're here to find out, like, what about this particular paper led me to follow a trail and start looking for other information about a completely different type of organism. Well, let me show you. Let's just go down here. Oh, here's the paper. Oh, by the way, here's the CT scans of the bat. And this is, like I said before, there's actually multiple samples. And so it looks like a whole group of bats are preserved in this block of limestone. And so this makes sense. This is like where this is found is limestone material that looks like it was at one time the part of a cave. And so it's probably the floor of a cave. And so bats living in the cave die, fall to the bottom, and they're covered by this material that eventually preserves them in limestone. So they're preserved in that limestone. Eventually the cave erodes or fills up completely. And then the top layers are eroded off, and eventually this limestone is exposed at the surface. So these are very, very old caves, right? They're basically fossil caves, essentially. You know, they're not actual caves that someone's gone to and dug this out of. So really great detail showing that, yes, this thing looks a whole lot like a bat, just like similar to today's bats. Here we go. Here's the important. Okay, here we go. Here's the figure. Here's the figure I was looking at when I was just a little bit curious, and that led me on this trail to try to figure out what a Solenodon is. That Solenodon is right here. See that? Solenodon paradoxus. Solenodon paradoxus. I have no idea what Solenodon paradoxus is. I figured these others, like Sorex, some kind of a shrew. All right, you got your shrews and you got your moles. Well, it turns out Solenodon is a different family, but it is very similar to those things. You can think of it as well, I'm going to show you a picture in a moment, but it looks like a large shrew, extra large shrew. And there's a few things about this particular group that kind of intrigued me. And I thought, you know what? I'll introduce you to the Solenodons. Before I go there, just expand slightly on this phylogenetic tree of the bats. Now you're seeing in a little more detail. All these are the different extinct groups of bats, or extinct genera of bats. Having lived in the time period between, say, 55 to 45 million years ago. And then you see these are all the modern bats, and then they're placing this particular bat at sort of the base of all the modern bats. They're saying what's significant about this particular fossil is we have such good preservation that we can determine that almost certainly this particular bat had the capacity to do echolocation. And so it's similar to modern day bats. All right, but then I look up here and I say, well, what are all these other groups? What's the sister group, right? What's the group that's most similar to bats? I've always been kind of fascinated with that. I don't know a whole lot about bat phylogenies. I don't know a whole lot about bat origins. So I was interested in that, and I looked up here at these, what we call the sister groups, right? The things that are most similar to the bats. And over here you have a bunch of extinct stuff all the way back to before the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, right? So this is really old stuff. They are a form of mammal, but very, very ancient mammals. But you do have a group that extends all the way to the present. These lines that come all the way to here, all right, that's the present on this time scale. And what we have is three different taxa here, which in their particular analysis forms what we call a monophyletic group, a group that is bound by a common ancestor sometime in the past, right? Just like all canines. You know, if you were to go back in time, there'd be a single type of canine that gave rise to all the canines that are alive today. And I saw this, like I said before, I saw Solenodon. I just typed that into Google. I was like, what the heck is that? And here's what I found out it is. All right, Solenodon paradoxus. Right, that's the organism that was on that particular phylogenetic tree and compared to, and it's from the Dominican Republic. Right, and then there is an extinct species called the giant Solenodon. And there's yet another extinct species from the Dominican Republic. So 3 different species, 1 that's alive and 2 that are extinct. And here's the cute little guy right over here. All right. It does. It just looks like a giant shrew, like 10 times, well, maybe 20 times the size of a shrew. All right, placed in its family. So let's go back to the family. So here we go. The family consists of 2 living members, just 2 living members. We've got Solenodon paradoxus, which again, as I said, came from the Dominican Republic. And we've got, boy, it's going to be scary saying these names. All right, then we have this other genus within the family. And it comes from Cuba. So that's all we got. We got 2 extant species in this family. So this is a really small family. I guess it's not surprising that I didn't know anything about it or I hadn't heard about it before. And there's 2 known extinct species from this family. And both of those are thought to have gone extinct, as you see here in Wikipedia, just in the last 500 years. So other than that, we don't know about any other species. Now, what that tells you is we don't have any fossil record of these at all. Right? There's no other known fossils of these. There's like subfossils. Those are recently extinct organisms, probably found in caves or right. And so that's it. Just those 4 different species in this family and 0 fossil record altogether. So like, where do they come from? Well, they look a whole lot like other shrews, but they have distinctive characteristics that set them apart from hedgehogs, moles, and shrews. But that's this group right here, the order. All right, so here's the order that particular family is found. And so the order would be a higher level classification, and that comprises the hedgehogs, the gymnures. Yeah, okay. I didn't know what the gymnures were either. So there's another group. There's another mammalian family that I am not familiar with at all. We got the Solenodons. That's what we just looked at. And we've got desmans, and we have moles, and we have the shrew-like moles, which are like moles, but they're shrew-like. And then we've got the true shrews, right? And I think just taking a glance at these, you can see how similar these organisms are, live in kind of similar habitats and so forth. So it's not surprising these are in a larger umbrella group and then broken out into these smaller groups, families, genera, species, and so forth. All right, now let's take a little tangent because we want to ask ourselves, we're going to apply this to young Earth creationism. You knew that was coming, right? I mean, you knew that's where I was going. That's why I was interested. That's why I was probing this particular question. Sure, I was interested in the bat, history type stuff. But when I found about this other group and I found out about its limited dispersal, all right, its limited range. Did you notice where they come from? Just Cuba and Dominican Republic. That's it. It's the only place they're known from on Earth. Both their fossils and extant members. Only place they're known from. So that, in my mind, raises the question, what about you? What do you think? What do you think I'm going to ask? What do you think I'm going to say? Yeah, I think you know what I'm going to say. A lot of people like to talk about those sexy groups like koala bears. Like, how come there's only koala bears in Australia? How do they get from the Ark to Australia? How did kangaroos get to Australia? How did lemurs get to Madagascar? I'd still like to do a whole video on that sometime. Lemurs are really fascinating. And it's a fascinating study of the likelihood of transport to a place like Madagascar. But video for another time. And, we could go on and on. Like I've talked about sloths. Like, how do sloths get from Noah's Ark in the Levant region, Middle East, all the way to South America? So, but, those are kind of like the questions you hear all the time, and you hear kind of like typical answers to those from young Earth creationists. But, you run into this all the time as you discover a new group, and all of a sudden you just discovered a new problem. You've discovered a new dispersal problem for young Earth creationists. Okay, before we talk a little bit more about dispersal in the fossil record, let's take a quick look at Antres and Genesis website. Actually, a particular article in the Antres Research Journal. So here's a creationist journal, and this is a very famous paper. Well, famous in a small circle of people interested in this type of stuff. That includes me. And this is by Jean Leitner, who's as it says here, independent scholar. And she was tasked way back in 10 years ago now, with trying to come up with a list of all the different kinds of animals that would be expected to be on the ark. Now, remember, the ark only needed to carry, right, the land air breathing animals, right? Didn't need to have whales on the ark, didn't need to have insects on the ark and so forth. It's just land breathing, right? Typically vertebrates on the ark. But in this case, she's interested in the mammals. How many different kind of mammals did Noah have to bring on the ark, or that God brought to the ark and they entered into the ark and Noah had to take care of? How many different kinds of animals? Right, that was a pressing question in 10 years ago, because they were going to open up the Ark Encounter, right? Antres and Genesis going to open up the Ark Encounter soon, and they needed to put on the wall, which there is on the wall now, the list of the different kinds that were on the ark. And so this is the seminal paper that kind of gives the whole list and describes why this kind is a kind versus something else. How do they lump and split all the different over 4,000 different species of mammals? But there weren't 4,000 species of animals on the ark, according to Antres and Genesis. There was a much, much smaller number of mammals on that ark. So let's see here. So this paper is about the mammal ark, and all it is let me just scroll down here. We're just hitting all the different groups, little description of all the different kinds. This is my go-to. Somebody says, is that a kind? Well, I'll say, well, the Antres in Genesis, of course, it's not the definitive answer, because there's no definitive answer, but this is the most commonly cited source for identifying the different kinds. All right, so I got to get all the way down to where I want to go here. I'm trying to remember where it was. We're getting close. Oh, the capybaras, cool. Love the capybaras. All right, right, what? Here we go. All right, so the order. All right, there's some evidence that the shrew-form animals, consisting of shrews, moles, solenodons, right, and the presumed recently extinct insectivores, might form a united group. So she's saying there could be some evidence that all of these form a united group in the sense, for her and for young Earth creationists, a united group would be they all share a common ancestor. And since they share a common ancestor, they're one kind. However, she goes on, different studies have given conflicting phylogenies, suggesting it would be wise to conservatively place the kind lower at the level of a family. So she starts by introducing the idea of an order, all right? Just like the bats are an order that contains a whole bunch of different families of distinct groups of bats. And so here we have an order that includes a distinct set of, or groups of organisms that are classified as things like moles and solenodons and shrews. But she says that, there's been some confusion. Like different analyses sometimes place these together in a group. Sometimes they take one of these out and place it with another sister group. And so since there's some confusion about whether this is a natural group or not, it'd be better to just simply call each particular family a separate kind, and we'll be conservative. And in their mind, this is being conservative, right? God just created a solenodon, and God created a shrew, and God created a mole. And then those moles became all the different types of moles that we have today. That would be the conservative approach to the minimal number of kinds that God made. However, she is suggesting possibly they could all really be the same kind. This might be a miscall, but we're being conservative. Could be that they're all related together. In which case, solenodons, shrews, and moles all share a common ancestor. So God didn't create solenodons separately. He created moles, something like a mole, shrew, solenodon, right, organism as a common ancestor. All right, don't want to belabor this too long. So she says we're going to split them up. So that's where they take the position. And in fact, I went and checked on the board that's at the Ark Encounter that lists all the different kinds. They list the Solenodontidae, which I showed you earlier on the Wikipedia page, which consists of two genera, one of which has one species or two species, the other one has one species, and there's two extinct species, right? Four total species altogether between those two. Right? And she lists like, what are some of the characteristics and so forth. And all these in her mind are all the same type of organism. So God created Solenodon, a type of Solenodon. So therefore, there was a Solenodon pair on the Ark. Two Solenodons were on the Ark. Now, those two Solenodons then have to get off the Ark and make it to Cuba and Puerto Rico, not Cuba and Dominican Republic, right, or Hispaniola. They have to make it there without leaving any other descendants anywhere else to show up anywhere in the fossil record post-flood. Then they have to live on those particular islands only. It's the only place they've ever been seen. It's the only place we have any fossil or partial fossil record of them. Yeah, I can show you that. I already told you where they could be found, but it's better to show you sometimes. Don't trust that Dr. Duff guy, so let him show you the evidence, or at least the observations that other people have made. All right, so I am on the paleobio database. Great site, really fun place to hang out and look up fossils. All right, accessions of fossils. And so it gives you a nice broad idea of like where we have found what and what time period it has been associated with. They seem to have some problem with their licensing, and apparently their map is not up to date. Hopefully somebody's donating something to them so they can update this, because this is a valuable resource. All right, I got to keep scrolling in and out until I get rid of that map. Okay, well, this will have to do. All right, I am going to ask you to trust me. There weren't any other dots on the map, on the world map. The only dots you're seeing are these ones right here. That's it. There they are, Cuba, Hispaniola. That's the only place where these are known from. All right, let me see if I can let's scroll in a little more. Yeah, one there, one accession there, another accession down here. And remember, these are fossils, okay? But I showed you where they live today, like where the extant species are, the living ones. Same places, right? Same area. Yeah, how old are these fossils? So what's cool about this particular map, right, about the paleobio database, is that down here you have the timeline, right, of history, or at least history of living things. And so you have the Mesozoic, that's where your dinosaur age, and you could click on the Cenozoic. And if I click on the Cenozoic, it's only going to show me samples from the Cenozoic, right? If I click on the Mesozoic here, you'll see my dots disappear. They disappear because there's no known fossils that are dated to that age in the fossil record, anywhere on Earth that's been reported, right? Not necessarily everything is a database, but this is a fairly comprehensive database. And if you go back to the Paleozoic, that's even older stuff from the fossil record. There's nothing there either. So you have to go up to the Cenozoic. The Cenozoic represents everything from 65 million years to present, right? From the catastrophic asteroid impact to present. So I'm going to double click on Cenozoic, and that's going to expand us out. So now we can see the eras and subsets on this. So we got the Paleogene, the Neogene, and the Quaternary periods right inside there. And then within the Paleogene, there is the Paleocene, the Eocene, and the Oligocene, right? We're dividing our time periods up into smaller increments. And so in the Eocene, we can break it down even to smaller time increments. And you see here the 23 right here, that's 23 million years. Down here is 66 million years. Here we have 2.588 million years. That's considered to be the break-off point for where the Quaternary begins. So now let's just click on the Paleogene. My dots disappeared, right? My samples disappeared on the map. If I click on the Neogene, None of them come back. If I click on the quaternary, aha, there they are. Actually, all of them are back in the quaternary. Well, the quaternary represents just the top thinnest slice of the fossil record, right? The geological column. That's 2.5 million years to present. But now let's double click on the quaternary, and it's going to expand the quaternary out for us. And with an expanded quaternary, we can see that the quaternary has the Pleistocene in it, and then the Pleistocene, we've got different periods within a different group, smaller increments of time within that, up to the middle Pleistocene. And so let's click on the Pleistocene, and my samples are still there. What about the Cambrian? Nope, they're gone. What about the middle Pleistocene? Nope, they're not there. What about, oh, there we go, the late Pleistocene. Let's double click on that because I got to get the time frame here. That's 0.126. So that's 126,000 years. All right, so I have to go inside of that group to find the late Pleistocene, and then we're really not breaking it down after that. But at a max, the samples found in these locations in Cuba and Hispaniola are 126,000 years old, right? A blink of an eye in terms of the total amount of time, right? So that's our total knowledge of this particular group of organisms that is identified as a separate family of things, and that Answers in Genesis considers a separate kind, right? A created kind. No evidence of their existence other than very, very recently, just on these two islands. That's kind of intriguing in itself. And we can use this same map to consider like how they got there. Let's go back here. All right, we're talking about Noah's Ark landing somewhere in maybe, possibly, in the region of southern Turkey. And so from there, you have dispersal of organisms. And so you had to have these small shrew-like organisms had to have made it somehow either all the way to the end of Europe and then all the way across the ocean and landed somewhere on one of these two islands. And then from there, island hop to the other at the same time speciating. But in the young Earth creationist timeline, this period of the late Pleistocene, all right, is the very, very recent time, all right, the last 1,000 years or so. So, I mean, we can argue like, okay, we're just missing the evidence. They didn't get fossilized, they didn't get preserved for us, but they're really older than that. And there never were very many of them, so that's why we didn't see them. Either that, they had to travel all the way over here and then across the land bridge, and then come down maybe to the tip of Florida, and then jump on some kind of raft, and then raft across to this area. And that's the only place they are. They're missing on all the other Caribbean islands. There's no evidence of them having been present on the other Caribbean islands. So this looks like a case of organism that has suddenly just appeared in the fossil record. Well, now how does evolutionary biologists explain that? It's thought based on their genomes, right? That they are rather distinct from each other, even the ones that are on Cuba versus the one on Hispaniola. They're thought to be millions of years divergent from one another. Oh, wait a second, Joel. What if they're millions of years divergent from one another? Why do we only have a record of them from the last 126,000 years? And I wouldn't be surprised if the fossils that have been found are actually subfossils in some kind of cave or something like that, and they may only be tens of thousands of years old. Right, so we have an exceedingly young record of their existence. And here I'm saying that these organisms might be, that the species themselves might be millions of years old, much less the group, and when it shared a common ancestor with the shrews and the moles, right? Which would be on the phylogenetic trees would be a whole lot earlier, right? On the order of tens of millions of years before. Wait, before I continue with that, let's go look at another paper. Okay, here we are. This is a paper from Proceedings of National Academy of Science from 2019. Casewell and a whole bunch of collaborators, all right, worked to sequence the entire genome of a Solenodon. So not only I had never heard of a Solenodon, but its entire genome's been sequenced. I mean, we've sequenced, I would be shocked if we haven't sequenced a representative of every single family, living family of mammals at this point. And they were particularly interested in the question of venom. Turns out that Solenodons and shrews, some shrews, all right, are capable of producing a particular type of venom. So it's an interesting character that actually potentially um, puts them in common with each other, right? Potentially makes them share common ancestry. So they have the ability to make venom, and you might be surprised by that because you're thinking like that was only like platypuses that could make venom, but no, there's several different mammals that can make venom. It's kind of an unusual characteristic in mammals compared to, say, reptiles. All right, what did I get? There's just two figures from this paper that I want to show you. Let's scroll down here. This is a general whoops, got a general overview here of two hypotheses, right? Two hypotheses for the origin of venom in this particular order. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of that order, but that's this word right here, right up here, okay? Right, so it's suggesting that the order itself is some 70 million years old, right? And it comes from sequencing the genomes of all these members of these other families that are part of the order. It also comes from other fossils from other members of the order. So although the order we're talking about, all right, the Solenodons are like virtually unknown, as shown you. Like there's no fossil record other than the tippy top of the fossil record of them and a couple living examples. The other groups, hedgehogs and voles and shrews, they have a much older fossil record. And they've been found distributed across much larger ranges, right? They're found, shrews are found on, I believe, every continent. And you have moles, all right? So these things are widespread and common across many portions of the earth. And so there's been a lot more opportunities for them to be preserved over a long period of time. If the Solenodons came to or derived from one of those other groups, managed to make their way over to these islands, possibly during like a very significant ice age in which the water levels were much lower, and some of the various Caribbean islands were all connected together at one time. I don't believe Cuba is actually connected to the mainland, but I have to check on that. But they're at least a lot closer at one time, so it makes it much more feasible that storms like hurricanes and things like that could drag vegetation out, and small animals could end up rafting across to various islands. I mean, we know that happens even today. I mean, it doesn't happen often, but it happens. All right, so the group itself, going back to this time frame, that's a very old order of mammals, because that goes back before the asteroid impact, right, at 66 million years. So we're saying that this order is an ancient order, and there could have been splitting off of those groups very soon after the extinction event. They are survivors of that extinction event. Once again, they're another example of maybe a ground-dwelling, hibernating type of organism, small organisms that would have been generalist in terms of their ability to survive on all different kinds of foods, insects, and plants. So that capacity is probably one of the things that maybe allowed them to survive such a dramatic event in Earth's history. And then after that, they began to speciate and take advantage of new habitats. All right, so you have the Solenodons here, and the question here is like, where did venom come from? That's what this paper is about. This paper is about trying to assess the origin of venom in this particular group, because some hedgehogs, some shrews have the ability to produce venom, and then the Solenodons all produce venom. And so I wanted to know, is this a shared characteristic? What we call a synapomorphy? Is it a shared derived characteristic? Maybe the ancestor, right? And that's one hypothesis. Single early origin with multiple losses. That's one way you could explain it. You could say like the venom originated way back 60 million years ago. And then when this particular group began to divide into other species, it carried the ability to produce venom into those different groups. But then a lot of them had no need for venom and lost the capacity, right? It's fairly easy to lose traits. And so single origin, then they lost, like moles and hedgehogs lost the ability to use venom, but some of the shrews did. I'm going to show you in a moment. It's not all the shrews. It's just a few of the shrews. And the Solenodons kept that capacity because somehow it was useful on these particular islands that they lived on. And this particular paper also, oh, here we go, 5.5. They're suggesting there's a break point in the Solenodon species of 5.5 million years. That those two species are 5.5 million years divergent from one another. They've been living on those different islands, separated from each other for that long period of time. And then you have to go back to find there's an extinct group of organisms that they think belongs to the same order that's completely extinct. And there is some suggestion that some of them might have had venom. All right. And again, that would be based on some characteristics of like venom delivery devices, right? Not that they actually found the actual venom itself, but it appears the organisms had a device for delivering something like venom. And since they're in this group that has other members that use venom, it seems like a reasonable inference. So that's hypothesis number one. Hypothesis two is that there's multiple independent origins. That the original members of this particular group didn't have the ability to produce venom. And then later, a few shrews developed the ability to produce venom. And the Solenodons, somewhere in their history, before they split into these two islands, they produced the ability to produce venom separately. That's another hypothesis. So how can they test that hypothesis? Well, they sequence the gene. Well, we have genomes from shrews and hedgehogs and moles, a bunch of different shrews, in fact. And then they sequence the genome of a Solenodon. And they wanted to ask the question, well, okay, is the Solenodon venom the same genetically as the venom from shrews? Let's scroll down and find out. The short answer is no, right? Their venom seems to be produced by a different set of a different set of duplications of a particular set of genes. They do all have in common, but their particular duplications are different, and they're using the genes differently with different mutations. And therefore, it appears they're separately formed, right? They derive that capacity to produce venom in different ways. So that doesn't suggest they share a common ancestor, because otherwise they would share the same genes with many similar mutations that then make the ability to produce venom. I stopped at a terrible spot there. Okay, let's expand this a little bit because we need to see this phylogenetic tree. Great. So over here, part C, what we've got here is we have the shrews. This whole group up here are a bunch of different genera of shrews. There's a lot of different kinds of shrews. But we think they're all one big family of shrews with a whole bunch of genera. These little red hashes represent the different genera that have multiple species that produce venom, right? And within each one of those three different genera, you can see that the molecular analysis suggests that those three genera aren't closely related to one another. They're related to other genera that don't produce venom. And then when they go look at the genes, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, they have different, slightly different, well, not more than slightly different ways of producing the venom. In other words, the venom coding genes are different in each one of those three groups. And so if you look at those genes, they're more similar, like, so for say, this particular gene is here. Their genes are more similar to the genes that are in this one that doesn't produce venom. So it appears that their genes are adapted then, or co-adapted to producing venom. And then this other genus up here that produces venom, it has a genetic set of genes in a particular order. It's called synteny, gene synteny, the structure of the genome, the placement of the genes. And then the types of mutations and duplications are more similar to other members that don't produce venom. So they have taken some of those genes and adapted them in their own unique way to make venom. So this is possibly 1, 2, 3, and then we have Solenodon, right? actually the family Solenodon, and the two different genera both produce venom. And so it appears that they have maybe one common origin because their genetics are similar with respect to venom. And then they shared it when they divided into two different genera within the family. All right, hedgehogs, moles, no venom. All right, now the complicated figure. So their analysis suggests 4 different origins for venom from this particular family. And it's a very different kind of venom, and it's made in a different way than, say, monotremes or other mammals that produce venom. All right, so then we get to this very complicated looking figure, which we're not going to go into detail because I've already gone 56 minutes and I really can't go into the detail. Anyway, I haven't read this paper thoroughly enough, but the gist of it is this. The evidence that Solenodon produces this venom in a different way than do other organisms, right, is because when you look at the KLK genes, right, so where does that evidence come from? Well, they do comparative mapping of genes in the genome because they sequenced the whole genome, and they wanted to know, like, where's the venom coming from? What are the genes responsible for that? And what they narrowed it down to was a group of genes, the kallikrein genes. And there's, in mammals have a whole bunch of copies of the kallikrein gene. Now, other organisms, reptiles and birds and amphibians, have fewer copies of this. This is one of the things that's thought to be that these genes have been duplicated over time, and then each copy of the gene takes on slightly different functions. You produce kallikreins. Oh, you're right on here, right? Homo sapiens. Here we go. Homo sapiens have kallikrein 1. They have kallikrein 1, 4, up through 15. Okay. And other organisms have slightly different kallikrein numbers of genes. And all of these are types of proteases. Proteases are enzymes that break down proteins, right? They attack certain amino acids or connections between amino acids and break them apart. And each of these genes might do this in a slightly different way. These genes are also expressed in different tissues at different times. And so you might be producing some in your stomach, all right, as part of your to help break down your food, but you're also producing them in other portions of your body and in other cell types, right? And you might produce it in your saliva, all right? So there's different genes here in this package of genes on a chromosome are being expressed in different places. So, all right, I was saying, this is the type of evidence they use to show that Solenodon's venom is different. It's produced by mutant forms of kallikrein genes. After all, you and I have a whole bunch of kallikrein genes, but we don't make this type of venom, right? We make proteases that break down proteins, but we don't make such an extreme form of this that it can have venomous effects, all right? Like our saliva getting on something else that we're eating isn't necessarily going to kill it. That saliva is going to help break it down when we swallow that food, and eventually it's going to destroy, right, those proteins. But we're not necessarily spitting out our saliva and killing our subjects and then consuming them after that. That's not actually what Solenodon does either. In fact, we're not really sure exactly what they're using their venom for. We just know that they produce an extremely toxic substance that we would call venom. The venom it takes on many different properties in different organisms. All right, so yeah, not going to go over all these different genes. The only thing I want to show you here is that Solenodon is lacking a bunch of kallikrein genes, and then they have a bunch of duplicates of kallikrein 15 and kallikrein number 1. And so kallikrein number 1 has been duplicated, and then the duplicated members of this have taken on mutations, and those mutations have created mutant versions of kallikrein 1 that make the venom. All right, so, or components of the venom, I should say. And they are different than the genes that are found in the other organisms in the same order. Right? They have duplicated genes in different ways and had different mutations. That's why they're thought to have independently derived their ability to produce venom. Homo sapiens have, just as a note here, you'll see that mammals share like a set, for the most part, of all the same kallikrein genes, and they probably do very similar functions. Say there's Homo sapiens and chimpanzees. There are differences between us, right? We both have duplicated forms of kallikrein number one that take on, that have, some of them they're mostly pseudogenes. They don't function right, but they've been copied. All right, so um, what else do I want to say about this? I don't know what else I want to say about that. Well, so there we are. I'm not really sure what else I want to say with this. I didn't have some grand plan or place I was going. I just, like, this is what I found out. These are the types of things I explored and discovered once I recognized that I didn't know anything about what a solenodon is. And then, in my crazy mind, it's not just scientific curiosity. I wouldn't probably be interested in if it didn't like if I didn't notice that when I just looked up Solenodon, I noticed that they only live in two islands in the Caribbean. And then, of course, that then makes me connect that thought to my general interest in the question of creationism and the validity of creationism and ways that we can critique that particular hypothesis. The hypothesis being there was a global flood and that all the animals, including Solenodons, would have had to have been on Noah's Ark. Therefore, they had to somehow get to these two particular islands. Why those particular islands is a good question. Their genetic uniqueness between those two different species. Now, they only sequenced one genome, and I showed you that there's like, even in that one spot, there was duplications of genes, and they're using them for different venomous reasons. Probably those species on the different islands probably have similar duplications. They probably do derive their venom in a similar way, but they have a lot of other genetic mutations that separate them in terms of their uniqueness on those two different islands, and they are called different species too. So there's been something's happened since they got to one of the islands, such that then some individuals got to another island and then they speciated. But this seems to have been fairly recent. But the genetic evidence suggests no, they've actually been there for potentially millions of years. It's going to take several million years to develop as much genetic variation as they have on those sites. So the whole group, you could say that if Answers in Genesis wanted to say, go back to a view that all of these, like moles and shrews and solenodons, are all share a common ancestor, then they could just put two of those in the ark. Then they could proliferate as they went across the world. And then some shrews, because obviously they're very shrew-like looking organisms, right? Just extra large. Maybe a couple shrews that made it to Florida then floated across over to Cuba. And when they got to Cuba, without having any predators and different environmental conditions, they then developed into these particular organisms. Speaking from a genetics point of view, that takes time. From population genetics point of view, it takes a whole lot of time to make those kind of differences. And so it's very unrealistic within a young Earth framework of only having 4,000 years to do that. But I think that's more plausible for young Earth creationists than to say that this is a completely separate created kind that left no fossils in the fossil record. So they were apparently extremely rare before the flood. Two of them were preserved on the ark. They got off the ark and then somehow had to make a beeline for Cuba and then only be in Cuba ever since then, leaving no other relatives anywhere else in the world. That seems that stretches the imagination. All right, that's just a little tour of a little molecular biology, a little bit of phylogenetics, a little paleobiology, paleontology, a little bit of an odd family of organisms. Let's cut it off there. Hey, thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.